everything we've covered before this is what I consider your foundation and your fundamentals of music theory. This is where we really get into the art and craft of music theory, where we deal with voice leading. And what that is referring to is how you can take individual melodies and combine them such that they create harmonies. And this is really what happened in the Baroque era of music history. Before that point, things were primarily melodies, and how they aligned up to create chords and harmonies that then went to was not something that was really considered or thought about as intensely or as in depth or even in the same way as after the Baroque era. So we start with talking about the melodic line. And this is what we're going to be talking about, is soprano, alto, tenor, bass notation. This is where we're going. So your soprano line has to follow these kind of rules of good melody, as does your alto, your tenor, and your bass. They all must be good melodies in and of themselves, or at the very least, not break any of these rules. So first and foremost, when we're talking about rhythm, for right now, for this earlier style of writing, which is early Baroque, Johann Sebastian Bach, rhythmically, we're using fairly equal note values. We're not having everywhere from whole notes to 16th notes. They're almost all the same note value, often quarter notes and half notes, or quarter notes and eighth notes. So we'll have two note values that are close together, and our rhythms will be simple. Okay, simple rhythms that are the beat length maybe a little bit longer. All right? We're not going to emphasize exciting rhythms at this stage of the game. Harmony. At this point, every note in your melody must be in the harmony. So we're going to say all chord tones. Or actually, I should rephrase that, say only chord tones. A little foreshadowing. At a certain point, you will learn how to write non-chord tones. You do not have that security clearance yet. You are only allowed to write chord tones for your melodies. The contour of your melody. Here, you have the idea of a singular focal point in your melodies. Sergei Rachmaninoff talked about this in his compositions and his piano works as performances, that each composition should have a single focal point, a high point, that everything else, everything builds up to and then falls away from. There might be some peaks and valleys on the way up and on the way down, but everything is overall arching going to this focal point. He talked about that as a compositional point as well as on a phrase level. So for us, we're going to be talking about that at the phrase level, meaning there should only be one highest note in any melodic phrase. You're not going to have high note, high note, high note. You're going to have more of an arch format to your melodies. Usually the focal point will happen halfway or 2/3 of the way through the piece, through the melodic phrase. So singular focal point. There can only be one. Leaps, and this is where we have the most kind of rules to be aware of. Conjunct motion. Conjunct meaning by step or by scale, versus disjunct, which is a leap. So leaps are allowed, but not leaps that are augmented intervals, sevenths or more than an octave. So no augmented seventh, or octave plus, more than an octave. So no leaps, no augmented leaps, no leaps of a seventh, no leaps of more than an octave. Also, when having leaps, when you leap, you step back in the opposite direction. So, as an example of that, let's say we had a melody, it went, and then we leap down here. So we go up a scale, G, A, B, and then we leap down to an F sharp. After we leap, we step back in the opposite direction. So if we leap down, we step up. So this F sharp would go to a G next. The reason for this, and these rules are not arbitrary rules, I'm kind of teaching them to you or explaining them to you as this is the rule without giving you a really good reason. But there's reasons for all of this. In the case of leaps, when the human ear hears that leap, it kind of feels the void between where you started from and where you went to. And there's that void in there that is super satisfying once it's filled. So you leap, it creates this sense of a little tension, a little opening, and when you go back into that space that you skipped over, it's very satisfying. And so that's why you have this rule of step back in the opposite direction after you make a leap. So if you leap up, you step down. If you leap down, you step up. The reason for the no augmented leaps, sevenths, or octaves is that they just sound very awkward. They do not have a flow. They stop a sense of forward motion because they're so dissonant, and it's harder for the ear to put them together into a singular melodic idea. And then lastly, if you can have leaps, multiple leaps in a row. When you do, they should outline a triad. So either your melody is moving by step, it is leaping and then stepping back in the opposite direction, or it's doing multiple leaps that outline a triad. Now, with these rules, if I then say, go ahead and compose a melody, that's a lot to keep in mind, right? It's a bunch of different things. Because there's one more thing, tendency tones. Think of it like gravity. There are each scale degree has a certain gravitational pull of where it wants to go. And if you deny that gravitational pull, you're working against the forces of nature, in this case the way your ear hears things and your brain processes them. The most powerful gravitational pull is scale degree 7, and it really, really, really wants to go to scale degree 1. So if you have scale degree 7 and you don't go to 1, you are denying the listener's expectations. That's not a bad thing. I mean, if you give people everything they expect all the time, you're going to be boring. Right now, we are learning how to be boring. We are learning how to give the listener everything they expect. Once we have mastered giving the listener what they expect, then we get to mess with them. And then we get to say, you expected us to go here, but we're not. The only way you can really do that effectively is if you understand what the expectations are. If you don't, then it just sounds like, there's no rhyme or reason. You just sound like a crazy person composing music because you're just like, sometimes the expectations will be met, sometimes they won't. There's no reason for them one way or the other, and therefore the sense is confusion. So right now, your goal is to give and understand why those are the expectations and do them. We're not trying to be very creative right now. What we're trying to do is master the rules and how they work. All right, so with this set of rules for melodic lines, how the rhythm should be harmony, contour, leaps, and tendency tones, let's take a look at a sample melody. Right here, this one here in G major, I gave you a Roman numeral analysis below, and I wrote out a melody. You can see in this melody that rhythmically we kept it simple. All of the notes in our melody are the value of the beat, which is common, and then a half note at the end of the phrase, which is where our cadence would be, to show that slower rhythms are often at your cadence point. However, this is not a good melody. Let me just play for you a little bit what it sounds like. So we have something that sounds something like this. This is not a good melody. What's wrong with it? Well, the rhythm is fine. How about the harmony? Do we use only chord tones? No. Right here. That is an A, and it's a 4 chord. A 4 chord in the key of G major is C, E, G. This note is not one of those notes. We aren't authorized to write non-chord tones yet. Does an A on a C, E, G chord sound bad? In some contexts, not at all. It sounds fine. Not in this context. And certainly not with the rules that we've established for understanding it. So, that's a wrong note. That note is not part of the chord. Everything else, we're fine there. How about our contour? Do we have our one singular high note, our one focal point? We do not. Here the problem is we have 2 focal points. This is unsatisfying. You might not consciously be aware of that, but I promise you that subconsciously you and every listener is. And one of the things that we want to do is develop what historically musicians call good taste. It's not an assumption that you have good taste. Actually, good taste was considered something you needed to learn and cultivate. How do you cultivate good taste? By listening to good music and analyzing good music. And then by comparison, you can tell what's bad music. And I think that's 100% accurate. There is good and bad music. It's objectively true. Of course, personal preference plays a factor, but there's also bad music that's poorly written. And developing your ear to hear when things don't work and why they don't work is something that's not easy and takes time. If I were to make the analogy to a movie, bad movies have multiple climaxes in the movie. Very often action movies are the biggest culprits, as they have a huge, very exciting action scene that lasts 20 minutes long. And then 15 minutes later they have another one. And for most of us, we'll say, oh goodness, it's just so much. Now, you might love action scenes, and that's okay. It doesn't mean it's a good movie. It doesn't mean it's well constructed. You just happen to like action scenes. In this sense, 2 focal points. It's far more satisfying to have the one focal point. Then, in terms of leaps, here we have a leap and a leap. 2 leaps in a row. Do they outline a triad? They do not. So those are awkward to the human ear. A, D, G. But Dr. Brellochs, Claude Debussy and fourths. Yes, this is true. Claude Debussy figured out a way to deny our expectations, yet still make it work. We're not learning how to write like Claude Debussy yet. Right now, we're learning how to write like Johann Sebastian Bach. Not even. Johann Sebastian Bach when he's only following the rules. Right? That's what we're trying to learn. So this is unexpected. This is not what we would have. So it breaks our rules. 2 leaps in a row. And then, tendency tones. We have a problem here as well. This is scale degree 7. It does not resolve back to scale degree 1. It leaps to scale degree 3. This is very unsatisfying and unexpected. So that breaks another one of our rules. So you can see how, at first glance, looks like a respectable melody. In fact, is not. And as you start to have to write soprano, alto, tenor, bass melodies that make up these harmonies, you will have to be very, very careful on the way you write your melodies. Since I will point out, whenever I see awkward leaps, this is the biggest one, leaps and tendency tones. So, of the things to focus on, 4 and 5 are the biggest. Let's take a look at another melody. This one is in D minor. I'm going to play it for you. And we get This is also a bad melody. You can say, oh, but there's certain parts that I really like. That's fine. There are parts that are fine. But it doesn't hold together as a whole. If we look, our rhythm is fine. I didn't write anything with bizarre rhythms. Harmony. We've got a problem. That note is the 7th of a 4 chord. But if I wrote 4 chord, I can't write that as my melodic note. So you must stick to the notes that are within the chord. Does a 4/7 chord sound nice? Yes. Did you know you were writing it? Not according to this here. So being aware of how you, and again, you guys, we've learned about 7th chords. You are not authorized to write 4/7 chords at this point. So again, what we'll find as we go forward, the reason we do that is so that we know step by step and you really understand each step of that before we add another level of complexity. All right, so what other issues do we have? So that's in the 5 chord, 5 chord. All the other notes are fine. How about our contour? We do have the 1 focal point, so that's fine. Leaps, and this is where things, this is the rule you have to be very much aware of. Let's take a look at this interval right here. B flat to C sharp is an augmented second. And right here, no augmented intervals allowed. In minor, this is the newbie mistake that lots of folks use. In a major key, if this was D major, B, C sharp, D, would sound fantastic. But in minor, because it's a B flat and we're raising the leading tone, it becomes an augmented second. And it does not sound as smooth as what we want. So we have an awkward leap there. Here's a leap, right? E to A. What's the rule when you make a leap? Step back in the opposite direction or continue and make a triad. This does neither one of those. So this is a problem with our leaps. right? So again, tendency tones, that's fine, C sharp to D, that's scale degree 7 to 1. So this is a nice checklist that you should use when you're working on voice leading examples. When we're notating soprano, alto, tenor, bass, it's notated on a grand staff. We put the soprano and alto parts on the treble clef, and the tenor and the bass parts on the bass clef. And we put them together in a grand staff. What we do to indicate the clarity of that is for a soprano, let's say we have a C, put an E here, a G, and a C. If I were to make these half notes, stem direction has new rules. Soprano stem always goes up, alto stem down. Tenor stem goes up, bass stem goes down. So that's how we're going to be indicating so that it can be easily read. Let me say it again. Soprano part, stem goes up, alto part, stem goes down, tenor part up, bass stem down. Make sure you're attaching those stems to the appropriate side of the note head. You can see what that is right here. With voicing, first thing you need to be aware of, and voicing is where you put the exact pitches. So I put C, E, G, and C here. This is a C major triad, if we were to analyze that. So let's give ourselves a little room here. There's our lead sheet symbol. It's a C major triad. And it's just one particular voicing. It's a good voicing because it follows all of these rules. First off, it takes into consideration appropriate ranges. For your soprano, this is the lowest you are allowed to write your soprano. And this is the highest. This is being written for choral settings. For solo settings, you can have a different range, especially higher. But if you want a bunch of singers to blend and come together as a unit, you don't want to write soprano higher than this or lower than that. So it's a compound perfect fifth is the interval, C to G. Compound perfect fifth, that's your range. For your altos, again, so this is sopranos, this is altos. For altos, it's also a compound perfect fifth, same interval, but here it's G to D. G, 2 ledger lines below the staff, to D, 4th line. You'll notice that this is in the range of the soprano. This is in the range of the alto. The tenor is the same notes as the soprano, but an octave lower. So C to G for your tenor. And then your bass is a low E up to C. You'll notice that all of these, except for the bass, is a compound perfect fifth intervallically. The bass is the only exception to that. It's a little bit more. All right, so first step, make sure you're writing your notes in the appropriate range. If you write it outside of the range, that person can't sing it. Second is voice crossing. You are not authorized to write voice crossing. What that means is the soprano voice must be the highest pitch, the alto, the next highest, the tenor, the next highest, the bass, the lowest. You are not allowed to write something like that. This voicing is correct in terms of the ranges. A tenor can sing a G above middle C, and an alto can sing an E above middle C. But right here, the tenor is now higher in pitch than the alto. That is called voice crossing. You are not allowed to do that. So no voice crossing. Soprano, alto, tenor, bass, in that order. So don't do that. Spacing. Here, there's rules regarding the distance between adjacent voices. So let's go back to our other voicing that we had before. The distance between soprano and alto cannot be more than an octave. Octave or less. That's what you're allowed between soprano and alto. The next two adjacent voices are your alto and tenor. Same rule. You cannot have the distance between the alto and the tenor be more than an octave. It can be an octave, it can be anything less than an octave, up to and including the same pitch. So, how about something like this? This is perfectly acceptable. The distance between our soprano and alto is a perfect fifth. That adheres to our spacing rule. The distance between our alto and tenor is a perfect unison. That also is not more than an octave, nor is it voice crossing, because the tenor is not higher than the alto. So you can actually have pitches sing, two adjacent voices sing the same pitch. That's acceptable. Now, we have a different rule for the distance between our tenor and bass. Here we're allowed to have a compound perfect fifth. We can have more than an octave. So, octave or less, octave or less, compound fifth or less between the tenor and the bass. Good. Last, in terms of voicings, we use the terms open or closed voicing. That's to describe a general type. So, if I have C, E, G, and a C here, this is a strange doubling, so let's not do that. Let's do this. That's okay. This would be an example of a closed voicing. Closed voicing and open voicing just looks at the top three voices, and it basically says, are there any members of the chord that are missing between here and here? Is there like a hole? Is there an opening? Well, C, E, G is our chord. Here's a G, here's an E, here's a C. There's no C, E, or G that we could fit in between any of these voices. So it is closed. And a closed voicing will be less than an octave between the soprano and alto. Less than an octave between the between the soprano and the tenor. It'll be less than an octave. In comparison, an open voicing would be for example, would be like what we had before. So we're again looking at just our top three voices, soprano, alto, tenor, and we say the chord is C, E, G. Is there a C, E, or G that we could fit in between these notes? Yeah, we could put a G right here, but there's an opening. We could put a C right here, middle C, but there's an opening. Therefore, this is an open voicing. And you will notice the distance between the soprano and the tenor is more than an octave. That means we're talking about an open voicing. Good. With these rules, let's voice chords. First off, we're going to voice chords soprano, alto, bass, because that is actually something, actually let's not do that first. Let's first do the soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and then we'll do a three voice variant of that. So here, we have an example. Our key is F major. We've been given the bass voice and the soprano voice and given our Roman numeral analysis, which is a 6 chord. We're being asked to put in the appropriate alto and tenor voice. Step 1, what are the notes in a 6 chord? In the key of F major. D, F, and A are our notes. Well, we've got 2 Ds, so we know that's been covered. We will need the note F, and we'll need the note A. But we don't want to break any of these rules: range, voice crossing, or spacing. Open versus closed is not a rule, it's more of like an observation, it's a type. So here's our rules, 1, 2, and 3. Well, we could put an A here, we could put an F here, we could put an A here, we could put an F here. So there's 4 options, but obviously we can only pick 2 out of those, right? So let's say we put our A here and our F here. Think to yourself, is that acceptable? And then shake your head no. Because the distance between this A and this F is more than an octave. So we have a spacing issue that is incorrect. So can't be that. All right, all right, all right. Let's make another mistake. Let's see how many mistakes we can make here. All right, this is a horrible voicing. It's breaking multiple rules. We're not breaking a range rule because the tenor can sing in F and the alto can sing in A, but the tenor is definitely higher than the alto. So this is voice crossing right here between the alto and the tenor. Not only do we have voice crossing, this is more than an octave between the soprano and the alto, so that's a spacing error. We could make other errors like not put the right notes in the chord and leave notes out. But let's give ourselves an example of what a correct voicing would look like. How about an F here, F in the alto, and an A in the tenor. Now we have D, F, A. Our range is good for every voice, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. We don't have any voice crossing, and the spacing is appropriate because here to here is an octave or less, here to here is an octave or less, and here to here is a compound fifth or less. Let's move on to this example. Here we are in E minor. We want a 4 chord. Step 1, what are the pitches? A, C, and E. We have the 2 A's, we need a C, we need an E. The only way to mess this one up is to do voice crossing. Voice crossing would be to put the E here and the C here. That would be incorrect because the tenor is now higher than the alto. So the correct way to do it would be an E here, E in the alto, and a C in the tenor. If we look at this voicing, is it an open or closed voicing? We look at the top 3 voices, soprano, alto, tenor, and we say, is this less than an octave between soprano and tenor? Answer is yes, it's a major 6. It's a closed voicing. We can also double check and say, look, there's no holes in the voicing where I could insert an A, C, or E. If we look at this example, is the distance between this A and D more than an octave? Yes, it's an open voicing. And then I can look and say, well, look, here I could have had an A here. It's definitely an open voicing. When dealing with 3 voice textures, the same rules apply, except that when we're talking about spacing in a 3 voice texture, soprano and alto can't be more than an octave away. But the distance between the alto and the bass can be that compound fifth. So we have a little bit of a difference here. So in this example, we have G, we have B, we need our alto. It should be a D to complete that chord, have G, B, D. Here we have an E flat, we have a G. We need to put our alto. We're not going to put the B flat down here because that would be more than an octave between our alto and soprano. We're going to put the B flat up here. Now we have a correctly voiced. So this is a compound perfect fifth, which is totally acceptable, and this is an octave or less, which is what we want. So, how you write your individual melodies, with especially paying attention to leaps and tendency tones. These are the big important things for you to keep in mind. And when you're voicing, writing in the appropriate range, not having any voice crossing, and making sure you have correct spacing. These are the big things that you need to be aware of. Thank you.